Good evening, everyone. Welcome as we start coming on in. It's a later night than normal, but you know what? Who cares? This is Sick of This Shit Publications. I'm Nick Perro, not your dad, joined by Jonathan Buchwalter. I want to make sure I say it right.
Yep. That's
Um,
me.
and I'm so excited to have you for my second intelligent masculinity discussion today. Um, and this is going to be a fun night. Jonathan, do you mind introducing yourself to everybody in the audience as they start coming on in for us?
So my name is Jonathan Buchwalter. I'm a history professor and high school teacher, and I've been doing TikTok content for a while. I've been doing work in history for a while, and as of a few days ago, I am the chairman of the Tuscaloosa County Democratic Party.
Well, congratulations. Maybe. It may be the biggest headache you're about to get into, but
Worth it.
it's worth it. Probably really worth it. And I'll say this from remembering my going back into high school and like my years of really learning. The person who had the biggest influence on me was one of the biggest influences on me was my history teacher, and I still remember him, and I still remember how he taught, and I love history. I grew up with an American history major for a dad. And so learned about revolutionary history and all of the good fun American history, not so good American history. So thanks for being a teacher. It's another type of service.
It's a love. It's a love. I love it.
Thank you for doing it. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into our conversation about like what got you into teaching. Why did you want to become a teacher?
So my original plan was to go into law, and I was at the University of Alabama at Birmingham doing history and criminal justice, kind of pipelining into a law program, and I was super strapped for cash. So I took a paid volunteer gig. It was like a reading tutoring thing at a local middle school, and the experience was so rewarding, and it was such a wonderful experience to work with those students and see them like developing skills and getting interested in the books that they were reading. And it completely changed the course of my life. I said, I have to do this. I have to do this full time. And so I moved some stuff around with my degree path, went back and got a master's in education. And now I'm teaching 20th century U.S. history, Holocaust history, and whatever Shelton State Community College assigns me for higher academia next semester. But it's always a crapshoot. So we'll see when I get there.
Hey, I love that. That's really cool. And that's a really fascinating time period. And it feels like we're reliving parts of it.
Yeah.
And so maybe can you tell me how that feels as a history teacher, professor?
Deeply distressing. It feels very, very deeply distressing because the parallels that I think a casual observer of the Second World War II, or excuse me, of the Second World War would notice are very much there. And then the deeper you go into the rise of fascism globally and the presence of fascist movements in Europe and how they came about and how they gained prominence compared to our present moment is like really unsettling. And it gets granular, right? So if you go down and like, I think of the incident around Horst Wessel, who's this musician guy, and he's a brown shirt, and he gets in these fights all the time with communists in the early Weimar period. And eventually that beef that he has with these communist street fighters boils over. And allegedly he threatens his landlord, who is this old lady. And the communist street fighter guys had like been kind of taking care of her for a long time. And so when she goes to them and is like, hey, you got to like rough this guy up. Like he's threatening me. I don't feel safe in the apartment. They go and they just shoot him. They just put two in him. And Joseph Goebbels turns his death into this act of martyrdom and movement making and makes this big propaganda to do out of the death of this just shitheel. And I think you don't have to look too hard to see really similar circumstances in our recent history of like the death of a propagandist being manipulated into a story of martyrdom for the cause, the use of a corpse, really.
And to be pretty blunt on who we're talking about,
Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk and the martyrdom that they're trying to make out of someone who's not a martyr.
Mhm.
Um, it's interesting you talk about Charlie Kirk, or you mentioned that and that story, because that was like the first thing we all were starting to talk about when Charlie Kirk died. A lot of us were like, this is some really eerie parallels. And we know
Mhm.
what Stephen Miller, who is our modern day Goebbels, would say and do, and he's doing or tried to do during that period. And it didn't catch on in all areas, but there are areas of the country where it did ignite additional fervor.
Mhm.
And like, I live in Arkansas and I drive out to Tulsa every so often in Oklahoma. And on the way there, there is a church very near a billboard of, or it used to be a billboard of Charlie Kirk.
Mhm.
But there's a church that has one of those Christian flags that flies above the U.S. flag,
Oh, cool.
just floating on the interstate.
Mhm.
And it did take hold in some areas. It's very interesting to see those areas. And what are like, how does that parallel to Germany and some of the things that happened there during like the rise of Nazism,
Mhm.
more so than the actual like in like we know a lot about what happened when the Nazis were in power, but not everyone focuses on what happened to the rise of the Nazis. So like
Right.
how does that parallel, like does that parallel like the creation of the brown shirts in your eyes or the secret police styles, or is there another parallel that has for like this movement?
So I think it's kind of a challenging parallel to draw because religion in the modern American and particularly the modern American Southern context works very different from religion in mid 20th century Europe, particularly mid 20th century Central Europe. So when we look at like the two great fascist movements, Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany, we see movements that are like very aware of the power of religious institutions and the size of religious institutions. And so, even though with Mussolini, you get someone who's wanting to create a sort of state religion of fascism, and that language is used over and over by Mussolini's acolytes. This is the new civic religion, the new state religion. They understand
Mhm.
they have to bend the knee to the Catholic Church. They don't have a choice because the Catholic Church is so influential. Both in its soft power and its ability to like guide people's faith and influence them from the pulpit, but also in its hard power, right? That the Vatican is right there and it has this ability to wield money in ways that the Mussolini government, when it's most fragile, cannot contend with. In Germany, you have a slightly different context where the Lutheran Protestant set is very much the strongest. And so you get some play that you can bring in because Lutheran Protestantism had a long history of anti Semitism that could be drawn on that was particularly effective for the Nazis. But at the same time, there's also this notion of like Christian charity and loving the other and the use of institutions for kindness and compassion against the weak. And those are things that the Nazis are very much trying to stamp down. And so you get in the Nazi movement, where in Mussolini's fascism, there is this sort of understood, like, we have to just work beside the Catholic Church. We cannot take them on. In the Nazi movement, you have one framing of Nazis that want to very much Christianize the movement and frame
Mhm.
Hitler as like this next savior figure, as the continuation of the story of a more like Gentile themed Christ against Jewishness. And then another framing, more from like Heinrich Himmler, that the church is the next enemy. And once communism is defeated, once the Jews are destroyed, then the church will be the next thing that is targeted. And so we see some isolated examples of persecution of different Christian sects that were most open against the Nazis. So, for example, the Latter day Saints, the Jehovah's Witness, were persecuted aggressively because they had the audacity in the Nazis' view to say, we will go along entirely and fully with the state program, except if the Gestapo comes to kidnap someone on our church property, we will resist that effort. And so they're going along 99% of the time. And they're saying, look, if
Mhm.
you come and get them on the way in, it is what it is. If you get them on the way out, it is what it is. But you can't come into the building and get them. And that was enough for the Nazi government to start sending those people to the camps en masse. So you have this friction, I think, where the utility of organized religion to the state changes in its context between then and now, where now American organized religion is far less organized. And you have this sort of movement evangelicalism, but it's not connected to some singular grand institution like the very powerful Lutheran Church in Germany or the Catholics in Italy. And instead, it's just sort of disparate megachurches that share some like school curricula that they sponsor, or Christian universities that they sponsor, or church training programs. And the Church of the Highlands is huge here in Alabama, and they do like minister training stuff, and they have a pseudo college they train ministers in. But it's nowhere near. It's like really hard to compare the power of that institution with the Lutheran or the Catholic Church in Germany.
So that's an interesting breakdown on that. And so with the more disparate nature of the groups in the country that are in the US that have come together, let's say the Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025 folks, they created a pretty good playbook for themselves, and they came together and put it together. And we do have I would say two major sects or like philosophical views on like a theonomy in the US or a theocracy in the US, because theonomy would exclude Catholics, whereas the theocracy would include Catholics because they could rule also. But we have the Seven Mountain Mandate viewpoint in the US, and then we have the Opus Dei Catholic nationalist movements, and they're very different, but they're both old, and I think they're older than Nazism in itself as well, obviously, because Catholicism has been around and Christianity and Judaism and the Abrahamic faiths have been around a lot longer. How do you see it paralleling? Because I like to use the Confederacy as an example a lot nowadays. How do you see it more paralleling to like the use of religion, if you know, from your studies, like these religion in those contexts, but also, since this is a discussion on intelligent masculinity, is how did that in a historical context, how has masculinity and like the view on masculinity been portrayed to like express these types of maybe to express some of the more damaging outcomes that we've had with like fascism and those trends?
Sure. So I think when we approach the strain of American authoritarianism that we're seeing now, we have to approach it in an American context. And Nazism and fascism are un-American in like an ideological sense, certainly, but they're literally not from here, right? They're from somewhere else, and they originate in the context in which they were born. American authoritarianism has always existed in this odd sort of oligarchical strain, and that oligarchical strain has always coincided with the power of the planter class or the power of the corporate elite. And what you see in the like late early 1900s, excuse me one second. I'm sorry, I set.
No, you're all right. You're all right. Hey everyone, how's it going tonight? I hope you're having a good night. If you're watching it live with us, good to see everyone in the chat here. Thanks for coming in tonight. I know this is a late one. No, you're totally fine. Yeah. I get Uncle Nicked a lot during shows, so it happens.
So as I was saying, the strain of American authoritarianism that we're dealing with presently is connected to the sort of dying embers of the old Confederacy and this like deep drive to restore the planter hierarchy as it existed in the South, and a similar version of it that was creeping north through early industrial barons. And this notion that there are these like categories of people that are worthy of consideration or not. And in the South, of course, that category is clearly along color lines. In the North, it's a little more complicated, and it has more to do with social class and national origin than it does race. So you get persecution of Irish Catholics or early immigrants from the Jewish community and so on that might be considered white in certain respects, but weren't fully welcomed into whiteness in the late 18 and early 1900s. So what you see is this framing of there's a right way to be, And the reason we don't want to be the other way is almost always traced back to some kind of sexual degeneracy, whether it is just pure eugenics of like they're going to pollute our blood and bring in some like lesser mongrel race by interbreeding with the pure people, or it is the obsession with the like sort of natural predation of other ethnic groups that they can't control their sexuality. And all of this is born of shame. All of this is born of shame. That you have a planter elite who's very used to just open rape as a part of its organizing principle, and they can't sit with that and say, I'm a monster for what I'm doing. They have to say, well, the black women are so aggressive in their sexuality, I couldn't control myself. Or a planter's wife who's deeply unsatisfied in a loveless marriage, finding camaraderie with someone of another race. And the men in that community not being able to stomach that these people that they're saying are lesser, lesser, lesser are like treating their women better. And so they have to build this notion of like black sexual aggression. And that if we let the boot off the neck, even for a moment, then they would descend upon us with their sexual deviance and pollute the blood with their, lesser race and so on. And so you have this connection of modern American authoritarianism that comes with an obsession with sex, an obsession with religiosity, because of course, if you admit that you're a bad husband or a rapist or what have you, then you failed one of your like most clear and composed religious tenets. And that's obsessed with class, that there has to be this sort of earned wealth and this earned elite status that justifies our betterness over them. And I think the Heritage Foundation, in its Project 2025 and in a lot of its dealings outside and alongside Project 2025, demonstrate this over and over again, is this like deep anxiety about sex and this deep anxiety about the ways that sex connects to religion and connects to wealth.
And in America, that's a very puritanistic viewpoint that's been here since the beginning. Like that's not a new thread in America. We were founded by a group that fled England because they were too extreme, and they came over and they were the Puritans, and they were being exiled out of England for their religious views. It's not a wonder that our nation has a abusive relationship with religion. I think that might be the best way to qualify it in my eyes, is it's an abusive relationship with religion, because religion has created abusive relationships down the line. And I'm not saying all religions. There are some very, very positive and wonderful examples of religion. And I know I spoke kind of harshly earlier about some religions, and I think it needed to be said, but I'm going to come at it from I think a more relaxed angle this evening. Is there are some really good religious groups and people out there. There's also some really prominent bad examples of this religiosity and this white nationalism strain and this better than group. In your studies, has this or how do you see this paralleling, let's say, from a veteran's point of view with folks like Pete Hegseth? In your eyes, what is Pete Hegseth to you, and how does he like fit into both a historical context, but also what is he as our modern analog? Why is he important in this type of movement for like hyper masculinity that's really toxic and destructive?
So I think you've got to trace it back a couple of steps to get us to our present moment. And if we want to start with like the friction of religion in American politics, I think a really clear place to start that conversation is in the late 1920s through the Great Depression, where you have this sort of schism in who is God to us and who are we to God, where one faction of the American Protestant church is a Christian socialist faction, and they're very invested in the notion of Christ, the homeless person who was cast out of everywhere, who was looked down on by the elites, who was this populist figure who took the bread and made more of the bread and gave it to people without asking any questions about their deservedness, versus a more elite and oligarchical framing of religion of like Christ helps those who help themselves. And you have these obligations toward your faith that reflect obligations toward your market behavior. And so, depending on what passages in the New Testament, what parts of Christ's teachings you want to emphasize, you can build a Christian socialism, or you can build a more reactionary version of Christianity that can fit pretty conveniently into whatever political notions you're building at the time. So these two factions sort of spend a lot of the 30s fighting over the New Deal and fighting over the rise of fascism. And what the more reactionary strain is looking towards when they're looking at Europe is they're seeing the language of propaganda presented by Mussolini and Hitler and to a lesser extent Franco, that the way to preserve the natural order of religion, of who is God to us and who are we to God, is through a strong authoritarian state that acts as the great patriarch, and through a strong leader and strong national leader who acts as this messianic figure that you can pair alongside Christ, versus the Christian socialist tradition of saying we must reject these false gods and these false prophets and these false saviors and embrace the sense of community and sharedness that the early church embraced. So this friction holds through the Second World War and then gains new fire in the 1950s around the civil rights movement, where you have deeply religious men, deeply conservative religious men like Bill Buckley Jr., going up against deeply religious progressive men like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who are again asking the same question of who are we to God and who is God to us. And Buckley's framing is, I think, obviously not fascistic, and we can critique Buckley and have problems with the conservatism of the 1950s without just wheeling and dealing the word fascism whenever we don't like something. So you have a Buckley who has this rigid patriarchal notion of the world, and the notion that the man ought to be the one voting because the man is the head of the household and the man represents his family to God. And so you get this really clean line between what Buckley believes in at church and what Buckley believes in at the ballot box, versus Dr. King's all equal in God's image and all of us sharing God's image together. And that manifests obviously in his politics, the civil rights movement, and his socialism. When we get to our present moment, we get to the Pete Hegseth archetype of the world, I think what we're seeing is a flavor of modern authoritarianism that doesn't believe in much of anything other than the preservation of itself. And I think the biggest schism between the earlier sort of religious attachment to authoritarianism or socialism versus our modern religious attachment to authoritarianism or liberalism broadly is that the authoritarians of old had genuine beliefs and sacrificed greatly to see those beliefs manifested, much to the detriment of everyone, right? When you look at the early Nazis, right, these guys were getting shot by the police in the beer hall putsch. These guys were going up and doing street battles with communists who were beating the shit out of them. Compare that to our modern authoritarians. Compare that to Pete Hegseth, who has never known struggle, who has never known want, whose ideas move in line with whatever is most beneficial to him in the moment, whose ideas all sort of coalesce around like what puts me in front of a camera more often, what gets me more attention more often, and don't ever ask me to sacrifice of myself, of my conveniences, of my comforts, of my preferred alcoholic beverages in Hegseth's case, that I might better represent this cause that I purport to believe in. And we see it around the world, really, whether it is a very different kind of authoritarianism in Xi Jinping's China, this notion that it doesn't matter if we, this purportedly socialist state, are engaging with outright fascists, so long as we can export our surveillance technology to them and raise the GDP of our country. Or you're looking at the more explicitly fascist Vladimir Putin, who, in an ideological line, ought to be diametrically opposed to even American conservatives, and especially to the Chinese. And yet they find themselves in comfortable bedfellows with American conservatives and the Chinese. What we're watching is an authoritarianism that has abandoned belief and embraced a politics of pure aesthetic. So Hegseth is going to have here's my editor. My editor-in-chief is Rixilis.
A little tiger coming in.
And they have abandoned belief. They've abandoned the authenticity of belief and replaced it with aesthetic. So Hegseth can, without batting an eye, Nori, can, without batting an eye, put the cross tattoo on his chest and talk about the Christianized masculinity that he embraces, and then just get sloppy drunk in front of a press conference and have videos come out of him just boozing and cruising and act like an absolute child, and not find any sort of friction between this like hard masculinity of the modern Christian man and his actual behavior, because that would depend on him having beliefs. Like the friction would exist in the beliefs rubbing up against the actions. But there are no beliefs rubbing up against the actions. It's just pure ego. It's just pure aesthetic.
Yeah. Pardon the dogs as they bark in the background.
Okay.
Is how, so yes. And one of the following that question, I guess, is as someone who is a teacher who works with young adults, late teens, young adults, those who are in college or where you're at, and in your area, what is it? What do you see? How do you see that type of masculinity playing out compared with your students or with those you work with? How do you see that playing out in your area, and what is the opposite in your eyes? What is the, as we labeled it here, intelligent masculinity in your eyes? What is a better version that you are maybe also seeing?
So what I see most often is our young men today are not different from our young men of our generation or any generation prior. They're 16, 17 years old. They're trying to sort out what it means to be a man. They're trying to sort out what they want to add or subtract from the definition that society has given them. The difference is not in the longing to become that every young man experiences in their life. The difference is that when they are looking for answers to that question, they can go to their dad if they want to, go to a big brother if they want to, just like we could, or they can go online and find an algorithmically driven tidal wave of bullshit, hammering them at all times to encourage sports betting and pornography consumption and bullying, because it's all for clout and it's all for attention. And they see that the pathway to wealth and success, the modes of masculinity they've been told to embrace, be wealthy and successful, look a lot less like be good at a job, learn a skill, take up a trade, get an education, and look a lot more like be an asshole in front of a camera as often as you can. And that, I think, even if you have a good father at home, I think even if you have positive male role models in your school, your coaches, or older siblings, those people can speak to you in the time frames that they are available to speak to you, and in literally every other moment of your day you can pull out your smartphone and consume some other more noxious flavor of performer who is always advertising something to you, who's always selling you something. And I think a more intelligent version of that, I think a better way out for that, is our young men have to get better at self-regulating their online behavior. They also have to have role models who are willing to engage with them and talk through why they shouldn't be consuming nonstop gambling and pornography content, why they shouldn't be consuming nonstop reaction rage bait content. And that's really hard if you're 17 and you grew up with a phone in your hand and this is the world you inhabit, and you're trying to have this conversation with your dad who's in his 40s or his 50s and still needs help sending an email sometimes, still gets mad at the kids these days and their phones sometimes, still would rather do things paper and pencil at work, and complains when everyone else at work is digital and he doesn't know how to work the Slack chat. And so that father figure might be really willing and really able to present positive masculinity to their son, but not be able to contend with the directions in which, and it really is an every direction attack on a sense of decency and dignity and self-control that's coming at their kid from literally all angles at max volume all the time.
So we had a great question in the chat, and I think these conversations in themselves are part of what we can do about it. But it's a great question, is what can we do about it? What do you think you can specifically do about it? Because you have a good platform on TikTok and you have a real life platform in both being a teacher and the head of your local Democratic chapter, correct?
Yeah.
That that comes with a responsibility and a power to actually change
Yeah.
things. How are you using your roles, these types of leadership and like public figure roles that you are either stepping into, have been part of, trying to build out? Um, uh, how are these like? How do you see these fulfilling your obligation or your want to change some of these um, more destructive habits? But also, what are you doing to actually help resolve them to
Mhm.
change this culture?
So the first thing that anybody watching can do, and is the most important thing that anybody can do, regardless of the size of your platform, is if you are around men that are younger than you, especially if they're teenagers, is you can be an example of positivity for them, where they're talking about sports betting and you can remind them that maybe don't, where they're talking about the noxious content they're consuming, and you can offer a counterpoint. So I don't really think it works like that, man. Not preaching at them, not beating them over the head with whatever your faith's holy book is, but being a visible example of self-care, of strength through compassion, of reaching down to pull up someone that's smaller than you, of standing up for people who need to be stood up for, even if it's just as simple as a word. But you always have to show it, right? You can say whatever you want to say, but if you're not doing it, then it doesn't matter. And so the power of your example, regardless of the size of your platform, is the most effective tool that you have. For me, because I do have the sort of burden of a leadership role in a lot of contexts, is I have to be really mindful of the way that I approach situations that I'm frustrated with, knowing that other people are watching me. And so when I'm, say, frustrated about political activity in the party and there's something coming up because somebody's being a knucklehead, if I lash out in anger, then the young men in our party's orbit see that and see that it's acceptable. And so I have to be level. Even when I'm frustrated, I have to be in control of that frustration. Or when my students are acting like knuckleheads, as teenagers are wont to do, then I have to be level for them and show them that there's a better way that involves self control and self composure rather than lashing out and taking whatever the latest hit of emotional drive is. More personally in my life with my son and with my daughter, I have to show them what it means to be a man through the way that I interact with other people and through the way that I interact with them. And that patience, compassion, quiet resolve is what it means to be a man, not loud and swinging your fists and putting up a fight every time there's a potential to put up a fight. And in that, they can see in me what I would want them to see in other men and what I would want them to see in themselves.
I really appreciate that answer. And so we haven't actually gotten into the real questions of the
Mhm.
interview yet, but we've gotten into the interview and the discussion. So, everyone, welcome again to Intelligent Masculinity. I'm going to ask some real questions that I have scripted that I like to ask for everybody, but a lot of this has been leading into it. And I'm the and it's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to hear what your definition of intelligent masculinity will be because it's not a term everybody uses. It's not a common
Mhm.
terminology. Most people don't associate masculinity with intelligence ever. Um, and that's probably for a good reason. But we probably should be changing that and figuring out. And I think we need to be changing that because men need to see positive examples. But like for you, growing up, being an adult, having all the experiences you do now, who has been one of the most influential masculine figures in your life and why?
Um,
And how does that relate to like what got you to where you are?
I think the easiest, clearest example is my grandfather. So, my biological father is, as far as I'm aware, he's still in jail. He had a long history of drinking, of physical abuse. He's never been around in my life. And so, the man in my life from my youngest memory was my grandfather. And he worked in the steel industry. He did not have an education. He himself came from an environment of abuse. And what I saw in him every day was someone who provided for his family, someone who asked after the needs of others, someone who took genuine care toward what other people were saying and was eager to share his interest with them. Right, my current love of firearms is born entirely of my granddad walking me through his gun collection. My current understanding of what it means to come home from a hard day and still understand you have to be the role model is from watching him do it. And I'm incredibly thankful. I've had a lot of great men in my life that my grandfather was certainly the first, but then when my stepdad came in, James is his name. He goes by Jamie. When my stepdad came in, and I always refer to him as dad. So if you ever hear dad come out of me during this conversation, it's him, it's Jamie. That he always put me and my sister first. And he always took the time to listen when we needed somebody to listen. And he never belittled the things that we were saying. And even as he sort of learned, like he's very much this blue collar guy and always had been a work with your hands guy. And I had always been a bookworm. And that even though he didn't really understand me in a lot of ways when I was younger, he always tried to. And that trying was everything. It was everything to me when I was trying to figure myself out.
Did your stepfather have, or did dad have other kids prior to becoming your stepdad and your father?
Yes, but only just. So my younger sister is my stepsister, and we're like a year or two apart.
Oh, okay. Was there a difference in how he treated you compared to your sister in terms not may I know there's tends to be differences in how we parent
Mhm.
girls and boys, and there probably should be less differences in some areas because we need to start teaching boys better intelligence and emotional regulation in the ways that we teach girls
Mhm.
the same skills. But was there a difference in how he treated you with, say, withholding or expressing love that
Oh
was
no.
noticeable from like a step sibling or a stepchild?
Let
Because
me
I'm
tell
a
you.
parent I have a stepdaughter who is my daughter, and
Mhm.
that's who she is. I also have a half brother, but my mom was his mom, is his
Mhm.
mom, and has always been. And so to me, that's really powerful. So was that it sounds like it was because he's a positive example of masculinity, but
Yeah.
how was that example in your life? And what did that do for you as someone growing up, knowing that he wasn't your biological father, but that he treated you with love and respect in the same way?
My favorite memory, I'll give you an example rather than an explanation. My single favorite set of memories from my childhood are every Saturday morning. Um, Me and my dad, we were both early risers, and I still, much to the chagrin of everyone else in my house, am an early riser. Um, but we would get up in the morning, we would have breakfast together, just me and him, because the girls would still be asleep. And then we would watch Dragon Ball Z together, and then we would go to the gym. And by the time we got home, the rest of the house was awake and the day was in motion. But every Saturday morning, like clockwork, we would watch Dragon Ball Z and we would go to the gym because he saw that I was taking an interest in sports. And then that interest in sports was very quickly becoming an interest in military service. And he was like, "Well, you're going to need to be strong if you want to play football. You're going to need to be strong if you want to join the Marine Corps." And he was a professional bodybuilder at the time. Like, he was absolutely enormous when he was in his prime. Um, and so he just welcomed me into that part of his life without reservation and didn't make me feel weak because I couldn't pick the weight up, didn't make me feel stupid because I didn't know how the motions worked. He was just there showing me how it worked and trying to meet me in the nerdy shit that I was into and bring that in to the physicality that he was into. And it means and it meant everything to me. And I model myself after that for my son. And right now, my little boy is like way too little to be going to the gym, right? He's not two yet. Um, but I know that as he grows, he's going to be looking for those same kinds of memories from me. And I have this reservoir of goodness that I can pass from my father to him.
I love that. And question on that: are you still building off of this? Are you still part of, say, the gym culture
Oh yeah.
in ways? How do you see the example he set compared to the example of a lot of like gym influencers these
Mhm.
days and folks like that on the Maha
Yeah.
side of the world. How do you see that being like influencing a culture that you have been a part of the gym culture? Because it's taken over in a lot of really bad ways in my eyes. But how do you
So
see it?
we are in the age of maximum grift. And if you can find a sort of manfluencer in any field, you can find a con man. The Venn diagram is just a single circle. There's no daylight between the two. And in that gym culture, you still got a lot of the old heads who are very much just people bringing their life with them into the gym, who act well and who act not well because people are complicated. But on the gymfluencer side of it, you've got, I think, a meaningful break in the way that, for example, how performance enhancing drugs are approached, where the old school gym culture was very honest of like, if you're blasting tren and test, you're going to get absolutely massive, and you're also putting yourself at enormous risk. And so you have to be honest with yourself about your risk to reward that you're willing to approach, because this shit is not good for you. It is Superman serum. It is not good for you. Where the modern sort of like Maha side, gymfluencer side, is you've got these gym bros who are just gleefully encouraging their 19-year-old followers to start on gear. And it's like you're in the prime of your physicality, you're at maximum testosterone production, your growth vector is better than anyone's will ever be, better than yours will ever be for the rest of your life. And if you just train consistently and eat decently, you will grow. It will happen automatically. And now, I'm in my 30s and I'm looking back at my 19-year-old self and I just want to shake him, because it's like you could have gotten so much bigger. If only you knew the mechanical knowledge that you know now, you would be so massive if you would have started with what you've got now back then. And then, of course, the growth slows down and life gets in the way. And I've got 2 kids and a job and obligations. And so 5 days a week in the gym has become 3 days a week in the gym. And like, that's a pretty good week, is 3 days in the gym. And like, you turn on the social media and it's somebody who's like visibly on gear, either selling you diet supplements, knowing they don't work and pretending that they do. And it's like, oh yeah, I take these supplements and they make me super strong. And it's like, you take Trent. I can guess the stack you're running by your physique. I can just ballpark what stack you're running and how often you're running it. And then having the audacity to say like, oh no, take the supplement line that sponsors me and you'll get big too. And it's like, no, not even. Or worse, of like, unlock the Superman potential, mog on all the themoids, blah, 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 and blast gear. And it'll make you feel good and it'll make you feel strong and it'll make you into a man. And it's like, no, the old heads didn't see it that way. All of the guys who, when I was a teenager and they were in their 40s or their early 50s and they're just like gigantor, they're not lying to you about how they got that way, about how they can be a father of 2, father of 3, full-time job and maintain a 6-pack and be 240 pounds of lean mass at 10% body fat. Like, they're not pretending that it's anything other than it is. And I'm not saying that that approach is healthy or that you should blast gear once you know the side effect. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that they were honest about the benefits and drawbacks of what they were using, where these modern fit bro dorks are just liars. And it's going to cause, like, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to see an epidemic of young men with joint pain because they blasted gear when they were 19, were picking up weight that the rest of their body couldn't handle. Or we're going to see younger men who are maybe like late 20s, early 30s, and they're looking to start a family, and it's just not possible because they fried their testosterone production because they were blasting gear when they were 20 years old. And it's really distressing that the problem points we're going to see from that fit culture stuff, they're a long way out. And when these 19-year-olds who are blasting gear get to be in their mid to late 20s and it hurts to wake up in the morning and they can't start a family with their wife, and like, oh boy, it's going to be a doozy in like 10 years.
Yeah. And that's, I don't think, a side effect people like to remember, or they don't ever talk about in the gymfluencer side, is that side effect on purpose because they know it's coming. But where we have idiots like Doc Oz who are saying where people are under babied and always blaming women for, say, the fact that that pregnancy rates have dropped and that family starting has dropped, but then they never talk about what the men have done on the other side to maybe cause the women to not want to be near them. And this is going to be one of those side effects is like, yeah, testicular atrophy is a terrible side effect. Like, I would not want my balls to shrivel up and my sperm to die because I was an idiot when I was 19 and decided to roid out. Like, that would have stopped me from having my kids.
Yep.
And I didn't. And my joints are all fucked up anyway. Like, I can't imagine what it would be like if I had done steroids on top of that shit. Like, I remember it being growing up, and I grew up watching. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't big when I was a kid in terms of the bodybuilder sphere, but he was in movies all the time, and he was honest about who he was and his size and how he got to where he was. And they were, like you said, they were all honest about, like, maybe we take steroids, but you probably shouldn't because it does this bad thing to you. And we all learned real quick on, like, don't do steroids because your balls will turn into grapes or raisins, and you're gonna be fucked for the rest of your life.
And I think what you're getting at, we're kind of like circling the drain of like the point, and I'm kind of seeing where the point is landing, and I'll just go ahead and make it.
Oh yeah,
is whether it is a fascist movement in the 20th century, or it is this modern like friction in religious communities now, or how we see gender dynamics playing out and how young men are targeted in content they're consuming online. It all is sort of circling this drain of like, young men are incredibly anxious because, like every generation of young men, they are aware that they are interested in women, and women are space aliens, and they don't know how to talk to them. And like, of course you're nervous to approach someone. What if you get rejected? That sucks. Like, of course you're nervous. The difference is that we had to ask Big Brother, ask Dad, ask a friend. Those are the only options for like, how do I do this? Where when you're 17 today, you can go online and you can say, well, oh, it's actually women's fault that the birth rates are down. And back in the good old days when men were men, then you would have a full-time job and be able to provide all you needed for your family because women couldn't work. And the better days before that, they couldn't vote. And then you change the channel or swipe up on your phone or whatever. And it's like, and then you can be the fullest version of man. Women will flock to you if you blast this gear and get it super shape, because there's this like sexual market value and you're on the low end. So if you get your jawline sorted and do bone smashing and blast a bunch of trend, then you can be attractive enough and the women will come to you. And it's all feeding this cycle of anxiety. And none of that is approachable, realistic, or grounded in reality in any meaningful way. And so it doesn't solve your problem. So you get more anxious and you get less able to talk to women and you get less able to interact meaningfully with other people around you. And you come off as more and more of a freak. And so you go back to those guys because clearly you're not following the advice hard enough. And they give you more of it and it makes you worse, which makes your situation worse. And now you have developed a dependence on your sense of self and your sense of manhood coming from freaks on the internet who are lying to you to sell you something. And it is, aside from being dangerous for democracy, aside from being dangerous for the mental and physical health of our men, it is just the most pathetic shit I can think of. And that, I think if we could connect the through line of like, what can the men do for the young men in their lives, is reminding those young men, like, this content you're consuming that is telling you how to be a man, quote unquote, is the saddest shit I've ever seen ever. And if you do it, you will be the saddest shit I've ever seen ever. This is my hot take, but social pressure is incredibly useful to get outcomes that you want in situations that you might not otherwise be able to control. And the social pressure of the real life guy at work I look up to is going to think I'm stupid if I do this, can guide those people away from those harmful behaviors. Even if it's not the huggy feely, it is effective.
Yeah, and we're dealing with we're dealing with a self-imposed or self-made crisis in a lot of ways, a societally self-made crisis. And it's it's very interesting to see all these trends coalesce because you can read about them in history books. Like you can read about what happened in Nazi Germany, where drugs and eugenics and this idea of perfectionism for the self with these unrealistic models of the Aryan race became their symbology. And you're seeing that paralleled. And that was also built on earlier American white supremacy over the slaves and the native population and all the history that got us to this point and then helped influence the Nazi regime and the Nazi movement. um, it's very interesting to see that parallel come back, and like how like things like looks maxing and stuff like, and those really dangerous body modification and self-destruction trends are not any different than they were years and years and years ago. And bringing it back sort of to where we started in the religiosity aspects of it is, this is also based in Christian nationalism, is the way that they use their words about this looks maxing. Like the ideal figure of a looks maxer is an Adam, and that name is chosen specifically because Adam and Eve, and he's the most masculine of men in, I guess, because he started the world, or started populating the world, I guess. But I don't want to talk about how much incest was involved to have to accomplish that, and I don't think they want to talk about how much incest would have been involved to accomplish that because it's fucking gross.
Yeah, holy Habsburgs.
And I also would like to remind them that Adam is the most beta man out there because he let a snake steal his wife. And when I say a snake, I mean he allowed a dildo to steal his wife, because that's what the snake was. She was the source. It was the source of truth for Eve, and she said, "No, I don't need you anymore, dude. You kind of suck." And so they're looking up to a bad model. It's
this fight that we're fighting is very frustratingly the same one.
Yes.
And you go back 20 years and it's like, no, it's that. And you go back 20 years and it's that. And then you go back 20,000 years and it's that. It's just like, if we could just get more dudes with their heads on straight to go up to their son and say, "I'm proud of you, buddy. You're doing a good job. Here's a hug." Man, the trajectory of the human race that we could change.
Yeah. And yeah. And that's the sad part, is it could be easy. Like it could be easy, is we just have to, as men, be willing to take the step and be uncomfortable and feel emotions and be willing to break through that cycle. And so we've talked a lot about like we've gone through some various topics, and we're just over 9 o'clock, but I don't want to hold us too late. Is I do want to get your definition out of what we've talked about all of this, of what do you think intelligent masculinity would actually mean if you could boil it down to like a core concept for men to be able to practice.
Master over the reptile. So inside us, the old bit of like, inside you there are two wolves. Inside you there is the rational brain, the higher consciousness of humanity, and also an animal. And the animal is base most instincts. The animal is drive toward emotion and instant gratification. And so intelligent masculinity is mastery over the reptile. To say, I have these big angry feelings, but that doesn't mean I need to hit something with a stick about it. That I feel this sense of drive toward whatever objective. And that doesn't mean I have to step over people to get there. And that when you master the reptile, you find that not only are you more satisfied, and not only are you living in greater harmony with yourself and with others, but you can be an example to others. And I was texting my friend this, one of my best friends, his name's James. I was texting him this recently, that we were all like kind of family night on the couch, and we were all flopped over. And so I've got like my daughter under one arm, and my son is like just enamored with the shapes and colors on the TV on the other. And my wife is laughing at something on her phone sitting beside us. And I texted him, I said, "This is the most like a man I've ever felt in my life." because I had people that loved me and people that I loved and people that I knew could trust me and that I could trust. And that is mastery over the reptile.
I think that's really awesome. I love that definition. I'll give you mine, and then I've got 4 questions for you
Rapid
before we
fire.
close out the show. Rapid fire questions for
Wow.
you. They are based on, and let me give you my definition first, and then we'll
Please.
get to the rapid fire questions before I go on a tangent. So my definition is, it fits a lot in with what you just said, and in this whole conversation, and the ideas that we've been talking about, is the refusal to outsource accountability onto others, and the ability to live with the discipline, or sorry, the discipline to live with the consequences of our actions and values.
Mhm.
And that, like, the getting over that reptile brain and just stepping forward and just stopping sometimes and taking a breath and leading without anger and leading with self-reflection, is a huge thing that I've come to see from a lot of this, and a lot of the men that I've been able to speak to, and the women that I've spoken to on this series, and everyone in between who I've spoken to on this series. It's amazing to see the diversity of thought, but the similarity of belief, and how we all value taking ownership for ourselves and reflecting and growing, compared to what is a lot of the example that we're seeing, that is anti-reflection and anti-growth and stagnation for ourselves. And a lot of what you talked about is learning to grow and learning to move forward. All right, I got 4 rapid fire questions for you. These are fun. These are based on the "I'll Make a Man Out of You" from Mulan, from Disney's Mulan. These
So first, you
are
have to be swift as a coursing river.
pretty much. You have to be willing to be as swift as a coursing river to answer these questions.
Mhm.
And let me make sure I get all my questions up so that I don't actually say the wrong things. All right. So, based on one of my favorite pieces, because I was a choir kid in high school after I got dared into doing it, and I found I really enjoyed it. And then I went to music, then I went to college for music. So, I found my love because I got dared into doing something. But we used to sing "I'll Make a Man Out of You" all the time in men's choir in high school, and it was a pump up song.
Yeah, it rocks.
It's the Let's Go Girls of men's music. It's our clarion call to action. So my questions to you: what does it mean for you to be as swift as a coursing river?
To know when it is time to decide and to decide, to not waste time overthinking problems and to act when action is required.
Love it. How do you embody the force of a great typhoon?
I think a core component of masculinity, one that the left and sort of liberal spaces tend to ignore, is this physical strength plays a role, and the ability to be confident in your ability to be strong for others in a very literal sense of like you can protect because you are strong enough to. You can move the heavy object for your wife or daughter because you are strong enough to. It's a part of the experience. It doesn't mean it's the only part, but it's a part that's like worth embracing and worth saying, like, I can feel pretty good about myself if I can increase my strength and I can see growth in the gym, or I can see growth in this athletic venture that I'm taking on. I believe it was Aristotle that said that there is something beautiful in finding what the body is capable of.
I think that's beautiful. That's one of my favorite answers to that question. Next, how are you as strong as a raging fire?
Um, Fire is like, that's a tricky one because like fire is very kind of in the space between physical and non-physical, right? It's like, how do you compare strength to something that has a mass of almost zero? I think the strongest I ever am is when I can pick my son up all the way over his head or all the way over my head, and he just howls. He just cackles. It's his favorite thing in the world when I go up and he's going for a shoulder ride, and he's just laughing the entire time. It's the strongest I've ever been in my life.
I think that's a great answer. I love that. And finally, how are you as mysterious as the dark side of the moon? which is less mysterious these days because we have taken pictures of it. But how are you as mysterious as the dark side of the moon?
I think you've got to read a lot, and I think here the words you have up here should always outnumber the words you have out here.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank
That was
you.
a really cool answer. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. I didn't even realize we were at the top of the hour.
And here we are, top of the hour.
And like here we are, like holy crap, this went by really fast.
It did, didn't it? Well, in the nature of people telling you how to be a man, selling you something, I would like to tell you about how to be a man and then sell you something. My science fiction trilogy, The Night Sky Darker, is available on print and on audio, and it would mean the absolute world if you checked out my sci-fi.
Oh, I would love to. And I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. Can you send me a link to it, and I'll make sure to include it in the post show notes for this episode. And then I'm also going to pull up a beautiful picture of you here. And it links back to your TikTok page. Is promote yourself. How can people find you and the work that you're doing?
Hold on, I'm trying to get that link for you literally right now.
Oh, sweet.
I'm on the old Amazon. Where?
And thank you, everyone, for being here with us tonight for this late episode of Intelligent Masculinity and this second one of the day. So you get to close out. You started your day with Intelligent Masculinity, and you get to close out your day with Intelligent Masculinity.
I am trying to put the link in the chat, but I don't think I have the ability to interact with Big Chat. So I'm going to private chat you.
Oh, yeah, private chat, and I will make sure this link gets dropped into our post show notes as well, so that everybody has access to it, because it is a big link, but I will make sure everybody gets to have access to it.
Trying to find the normal human being link on the Amazon page, but it's only giving me the option for the Gigantor link. So I guess that's what you got.
Haha, found a short link.
Excellent.
To the trilogy. So, and yes, this is on Amazon. I'm sorry, folks. Yeah,
their royalties are incredible. What do you want from me? I've got kids to feed. The royalty rates are really good.
Yeah, you got to make money somehow right now. And sometimes you got to make money from places you don't always want to associate with. But promote yourself and the work that you're doing. I dropped your link into our Substack chat. I'll drop it here too into the broader chat for anyone who's here. But how can people find you and support you?
Best way to find me on everything is at Johnster Truck. It's on the screen. It's like Monster Truck, but with a J. I'm most active on TikTok. I post most every day. I post some kind of history video on TikTok. I also have a Patreon that I'll upload essays to, historical writings to. On occasion, you subscribe to that for $5 and get access to writing that I don't put anywhere else. And then my thing that I'm most excited about sharing with everyone is the books. They were my great labor of love. I have been told by my wife that they are very, very good, and she's right about everything. So clearly, you'll all like it too.
Well, yes, I'm reading the description. All right, from book 1. Here we go. Classic elements of sci-fi, fantasy, and cosmic horror collide in this epic tale of love, loss, and redemption. The book is perfect for readers who grow up on young adult sci-fi fantasy but want a story that has grown and matured as they have. Just so you all get the beginnings of the, from what you might expect from the first book of the Night Sky trilogy. So I'm excited. I love having friends who are writers and authors, because I get a lot of really cool books to read and sources to read, and it's fun and just makes me happy.
The highest praise I've ever received was from a reader who found me on TikTok, and they said, "Oh, your stuff is like Star Wars if it was written for grown-ups." And that's the highest compliment I've ever been given toward my work. Okay,
that's a good compliment. I've got a Star Wars poster hanging on from the original Star Wars hanging on my wall for the movie series. So, I'm okay with this. I'm happy about that. So Jonathan, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure to get to talk to you again. And I will see you around here soon. Everyone, I'll see you tomorrow on Banner and Backbone if you're here watching it live for the Anti-Fascist Book Club, where we're reading Surviving Autocracy by Masha Gessen. Jonathan, if you ever have time on Fridays and you would like to join for a Anti-Fascist Book Club reading with me and Chris Goldsmith and Tara Devlin and our friend Doc Steph Wilson.
My favorite people and anti-fascism. Come on now.
Would love to have you.
I'd love to be there.
I'll send you a message, and maybe not this week, but we'll get you here for a week coming up where you can come on and join us. So again, everyone, thanks for being here with us. Thanks for such a great night. As we like to say here, is just suck less. And we're done being sick of this shit. So we're doing this shit. And part of this is the intelligent masculinity, these discussions. Everyone, thanks for being here. I'll talk to you again soon. Jonathan, thanks, brother. I appreciate it.